Chapter 9. Heart to Hearts. 2 days after the photo scandal rocked C7's carefully protected world, the immediate crisis had begun to subside. The company's official statement, acknowledging James's twin brother without confirming or denying any specific relationships, had been received with the expected mix of fan support, heartbreak, and conspiracy theories. #C7 dating and #LEGIO and heartbreak had trended simultaneously, perfectly encapsulating the fandom's divided response. The members had been granted a reprieve from public appearances to focus on comeback preparations, which everyone understood was corporate speak for hide until the scandal dies down. This unexpected house arrest found the 7 idols scattered throughout their dorm in various states of emotional processing. Unlike all established behavior patterns, Silas had not emerged from his studio for 36 hours straight. This wasn't entirely strange. His pre-comeback composition binges were legendary, but the nature of the music drifting through the walls was raising eyebrows. Instead of C7's signature upbeat dance tracks or powerful anthems, the muffled melodies suggested something emotional. Julian had pressed his ear against the studio door multiple times, reporting with wide-eyed astonishment that he had heard minor chords and what might have been, though he could scarcely believe it, the sound of Silas humming. "It's like witnessing Bigfoot riding the Loch Ness Monster while being abducted by aliens," Julian had whispered dramatically. "Statistically impossible, yet happening before our very ears." When Silas finally emerged, bleary-eyed and caffeine-animated, he clutched a USB drive with the protective intensity of a mother bear guarding her cubs. He shuffled toward the kitchen in his rumpled clothing, seemingly oblivious to the world around him, until he realized 4 bandmates were watching him with undisguised curiosity. "What?" he growled, defensive hand closing tighter around the USB drive. "Nothing," John replied innocently. "Just wondering if you're still alive after your creative hibernation." "Fine. Alive. Working." Silas attempted to sidestep the human barrier, but Julian vibrated into his path. "Working on what exactly?" Julian pressed, bouncing on his toes. "Because it doesn't sound like anything for our comeback album, unless we're suddenly pivoting to indie ballads about unrequited feelings and the complexities of human attractions." Silas's eye twitched, a microscopic movement that, from him, was equivalent to a full-body flinch. "It's a side project," he muttered, gaze fixed on the floor. "Personal exploration. Experimental composition." Experimental composition, inspired by a certain argumentative indie producer with strong opinions about mainstream music? Roman inquired, fiddling with his glasses. Silas's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "How did you?" MiRe posted on her production blog about collaborating with an unnamed hip-hop producer who's exploring beyond commercial formulas, Jake quoted, holding up his phone displaying said blog. A flush crept up Silas's neck, another unprecedented phenomenon that had his bandmates exchanging significant glances. "It's just an experimental track," Silas insisted, his monotone wavering slightly. "Nothing serious." "Is that why you're strangling that USB drive like it contains nuclear launch codes?" John asked mildly. Silas glanced down at his white-knuckled grip on the drive, pretending he was surprised by its intensity. After a moment of visible internal struggle, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "If I let you hear it, will you stop this interrogation?" he asked. 4 heads nodded eagerly. With apparent reluctance, Silas led them back to his studio, a sacred space usually off-limits to even his closest friends. The room was a monument to organized chaos, equipment meticulously arranged but surrounded by scattered composition notes, empty coffee cups, and the general detritus of creative obsession. He inserted the USB drive into his computer with the careful precision of a bomb disposal expert, then turned to his bandmates with startling vulnerability in his eyes. "This stays between us," he whispered. "It's not finished. Or polished. Or necessarily good." "Of course," John assured him, the others nodding in solemn agreement. Silas took a deep breath, then pressed play. The track that filled the room was a technical masterpiece, with complex melodies intertwining with subtle percussion, conveying conflict and harmony. It was the musical equivalent of an argument that becomes a conversation, opposition transforming into a complementary balance. Most shocking was the emotional quality. The composition conveyed susceptibility without a single lyric, as if the instruments were revealing feelings too complex for words. When the final notes faded, silence packed the studio. Silas stared resolutely at his keyboard, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. "That was," John began, searching for adequate words. "Beautiful," Roman supplied. "I've never heard you compose like that before," Jake added with admiration. "It's like your music brain and your feeling brain finally had a conversation," Julian exclaimed, characteristically direct. Silas continued studying his keyboard with intensity. "It's just an experimental approach to dynamic contrast and harmonic progression," he muttered, though his rigid posture betrayed the significance behind the technical terminology. "Does MiRe know this is for her?" John asked quietly. Silas's head snapped up, panic flashing across his impassive face. "It's not for her. It is about her. About us. The creative dynamic between opposing approaches. A musical exploration of contrast and complementary opposition." 4 identical expressions of knowing disbelief met this declaration. "That," Roman said carefully, "is the most elaborate way I've ever heard someone describe having feelings for someone." Silas opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, his formidable logical faculties failing him. "So, what are you going to do?" Jake asked after a moment. Silas ran a hand through his already messy hair. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Creative collaboration is one thing. Personal involvement is uncharted territory." "You could start by sending her the track," John suggested practically. "Let the music speak for itself." "What if she doesn't understand what it's trying to say?" Silas asked, a rare note of insecurity in his voice. "Based on her blog post, I think she already does," Jake pointed out. Silas nodded slowly, resolution forming in his expression. "I'll send it tonight. After final mixing adjustments. And maybe consider brushing your hair and changing your clothes first," Julian suggested helpfully. "You look like a musical genius held hostage by his creativity for 2 days. Which is technically accurate, but not necessarily the image you want to project." For the first time in recent memory, Silas's mouth curved into a shape approximating a smile. "Noted." As the members filed out of the studio, leaving Silas to his final adjustments, they exchanged meaningful glances. Their most emotionally reserved member had just revealed more vulnerability through a 3-minute music track than he had in 5 years of interviews, variety shows, and behind-the-scenes content combined. John had never considered himself a stress baker, but the past few days' events had awakened a dormant culinary coping mechanism. The dorm kitchen had become his fortress of solitude, with counters covered with an ever-expanding array of experimental dishes that the other members were happy to help consume. Tonight's project was particularly ambitious, a fusion dessert combining traditional Korean flavors with French pastry techniques. John was in the midst of a delicate sugar work component that required absolute concentration when the dorm's front door buzzed unexpectedly. Glancing at the security monitor, John was startled to see Sol's familiar figure in the lobby. She had never visited the dorm before. Their interactions had been confined to cooking classes and arranged tea meetings. Quickly removing his apron and checking his reflection in the microwave door, A habit developed through years of being camera-ready at a moment's notice, John buzzed her up. The greeting he had prepared died on his lips when he opened the door. Sol's composed expression was alarmingly absent, replaced by reddened eyes and an uncharacteristic dishevelment that suggested emotional distress. "Sol?" John surprised. "Is everything okay?" She did not respond immediately, and for a moment John thought she might cry, something he had assumed was physically impossible for the stoic food critic. "I apologize for arriving unannounced," she said finally, her diction slightly wavering. "I was in the area and found myself here somewhat involuntarily." John stepped aside to let her in, concern overwhelming his surprise. "No apology necessary. Please come in." Sol entered cautiously. Her gaze was immediately drawn to the kitchen, visible through the open living area. "You're in the middle of something," she observed, turning back toward the door. "I shouldn't interrupt." "You're not interrupting," John assured her quickly. "I was just experimenting with some new techniques. Nothing important." This was a significant lie. The dessert represented 3 days of planning and preparation, but John found he meant it nonetheless. Something was wrong, and no culinary creation could take precedence over it. "Can I offer you tea?" he asked, recalling the familiar ritual that had structured their previous meetings. Sol nodded gratefully, following him to the kitchen, where she tentatively perched on a bar stool. At the same time, John prepared 2 cups of butterfly pea flower tea, her favorite because of its color-changing properties when added to citrus. As the kettle heated, John noted her unusual silence. Sol had his kitchen professionally examined, with comments on the organization of his equipment and the selection of his ingredients. She seemed lost in thought tonight, staring at the counter without seeing it. Setting the steaming cup before her, John added a small slice of lemon on the side. Their established ritual helped her regain control for the moment. The tea changed from deep blue to vibrant purple. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked, adding his lemon to his cup and watching the color shift. Sol's fingers traced the rim of her cup, her decisive movements replaced by hesitation. "My restaurant review column has been discontinued," she said, the words coming out with a painful rhythm. "Effective immediately. The publication is pivoting to more accessible food content with broader appeal." "I'm sorry," he said, understanding how devastating this would be for someone who had built their career focused on gourmet niche excellence. "They asked if I'd be interested in writing top 10 affordable brunch spots lists instead," Sol continued, a note of bitterness in her voice. "My detailed analysis of culinary technique and ingredient authenticity is too niche for current reader metrics." "That's ridiculous," John responded, indignation rising on her behalf. "Your reviews are masterpieces of technical assessment. I've learned more about flavor composition from reading your columns than from 3 years of culinary training." Sol looked up, surprised momentarily, displacing her distress. "You read my columns?" "Of course," John admitted, slightly embarrassed by the revelation. "Every week since we met. I have them bookmarked on my phone." Her expression brightened, a subtle softening nearly imperceptible to someone who hadn't spent weeks analyzing her tiny reactions to his cooking. "I didn't realize. Your analysis of Chef Epicure's deconstructed bibimbap last month was astute," John continued, warming to the subject. "Especially your observation about how the separation of components both honored and challenged traditional presentation expectations." A ghost of a smile touched Sol's lips. "You truly read them?" "With religious devotion," John confirmed. "Your perspective has influenced my approach to composition and balance." Sol studied him for a long time, as if reassessing some previously held assumption. "You never mentioned this during our meetings." John shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't want to come across as overeager Or like I was studying for your approval? Even though you were, she asked, perceptive in her question. Even though I was, John admitted with a rueful smile. Sol's fingers finally reached for the lemon slice. She squeezed it firmly into her tea and watched the color transform. The familiar ritual seemed to center her somewhat. I don't know what I'll do now, she confessed quietly. I don't know how to write content to generate clicks rather than elevate culinary discourse. Then don't, John suggested simply. Sol looked up confused. There are other outlets for serious culinary criticism, John pointed out. Other publications, or even independent platforms. Your reputation doesn't disappear because one outlet makes a short-sighted decision. Sol's mind was visibly engaging with the problem as a challenge rather than just a setback. Perhaps, she conceded. Though establishing a new professional position would require significant effort. Or, John suggested carefully, you could consider it an opportunity to expand your approach. Not compromising your standards, but perhaps finding new ways to make technical excellence accessible to broader audiences. Sol's eyebrow rose skeptically. You think I should become more approachable? I think you should become more you, John clarified. Your technical knowledge is unparalleled, but there's more to Sol Lee than flavor descriptions. Is there? She asked, with an openness that surprised John. Sometimes I wonder if I've become so focused on critical evaluation that I've lost the capacity for simple enjoyment. John paused. When was the last time you ate something just because it brought you joy, not to analyze or assess it? Sol's silence answered enough. Wait here, John said, purposefully moving toward his refrigerator. Moments later, he returned with a small glass dish, holding what appeared to be a simple chocolate pudding, the most modest and unassuming dessert one could imagine. What is this? Sol asked, curiosity evident as she examined the simple presentation. My grandmother's chocolate pudding, John explained, placing it before her with a spoon. Not deconstructed, not infused with exotic flavors, not technically complex in any way. Comfort in a bowl. Sol glared at the dessert with scientific curiosity, as if it were a specimen from an unknown culinary universe. No garnish? No textural contrast elements? None, John confirmed. Just chocolate pudding that my grandmother made when I was upset. No critical assessment is needed, just the simple question, does it bring comfort? With visible hesitation, as if breaking some long-standing custom, Sol lifted a small spoonful to her lips. John watched her expression. Years of performing in front of cameras made him highly sensitive to even the tiniest shifts in facial micro-expressions. There, the tiniest widening of her eyes, a brief tension release around her mouth, tiny tells that would be almost impossible to notice unless you were specifically looking for them. Sol began, seemingly struggling to find words beyond her usual food critic vocabulary. Don't analyze, John encouraged. Just feel. Sol took another spoonful, then another. It reminds me of childhood, she said finally. Before I learned to deconstruct flavors into their parts. Sometimes the simplest things carry the most meaning, John observed. Perhaps this is what's been missing from my critical approach, she acknowledged thoughtfully. The recognition that emotional resonance is a valid measure. Not replacing technical assessment, John clarified, but complementing it with something equally important. As they continued talking, John noticed a subtle shift in Sol's mood. The walls she had built over years of detachment were beginning to come down. Then it happened. When John made an admittedly terrible food pun he couldn't resist making, "This situation calls for us to putting our heads together," Sol erupted into laughter. The sound was so unexpected that both froze in surprise. Did you just? John began incredulously. I believe I did, Sol confirmed, looking as shocked as he felt. But it wasn't even a good pun, John pointed out, bewildered by this unprecedented breakthrough. Perhaps that's why, Saul suggested, a hint of mischief entering her expression. It was so objectively terrible that it circumvented my critical faculties entirely. And then she laughed. John stared in wonder, feeling as if he had witnessed a rare astronomical event. I've been trying to make you laugh for weeks with composed culinary wordplay, and it's the worst pun in my arsenal that finally succeeds? The universe has a particular sense of humor, Saul observed dryly, which only made John laugh in turn. Julian sat on a park bench, hands resting motionless on his knees, watching a group of children playing nearby without any urge to join their game, demonstrate improved techniques, or organize them into more interesting team configurations. This strange condition started 3 days ago, after Hope dramatically named it the energy apocalypse. Their latest adventure, a spontaneous road trip to a remote hiking spot, turned into an impromptu dance competition with surprised hikers as their audience. It ended with both collapsing on a hillside, physically drained beyond their usual stamina. We might be too much, Hope had observed between gasping breaths, her purple hair splayed against the grass like exotic flowers. Together, I mean? Like mixing energy drinks with espresso, and then adding sugar. Julian had been too winded to effectively defend their dynamic, managing only a feeble, but fun though. The most fun, Hope had agreed, turning to face him with seriousness in her usually playful eyes. But maybe we need to try something different next time. Different how? Julian had asked, perplexed by any alternatives to their established pattern of ever-escalating adventures. Hope had propped herself on one elbow, studying him with thoughtfulness. When was the last time you just existed? Without planning the next activity, or thinking about what comes after this moment? Julian had opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again, realizing he had no response. The concept of simply existing without action or forward momentum was entirely foreign to his understanding of life. Which led to his current experiment, sitting still on a park bench, trying to experience whatever mysterious state of being Hope had described. So far, he had managed 13 minutes, a personal record for voluntary inactivity while conscious, and was discovering sensations he had never noticed before. The varied sounds of the park. The quality of afternoon sunlight, filtering through leaves. The complex emotions visible on the faces of passing strangers. It was not entirely terrible. His phone lit up with an incoming message from Hope. How's Operation Stillness going? Are you still alive, or did you spontaneously combust from stored energy? Julian smiled, typing back, 13 minutes and counting. I discovered that clouds have different shapes. I'm mind blown. Her response came immediately, revolutionary discovery. Scientific papers, forthcoming. So proud. Julian chuckled, then saw a familiar figure approaching. Hope herself, carrying 2 bubble teas, and wearing an exaggerated look of shock. You're doing it, she exclaimed, dropping dramatically onto the bench beside him, and presenting him with a bubble tea, as if awarding a medal. I half expected to find you organizing a spontaneous park-wide dance battle, or teaching squirrels to high-five. I considered both options, Julian admitted, accepting the drink gratefully. But I committed to the experiment. For science. And Hope prompted, studying him. Any groundbreaking discoveries about the state of being, rather than doing? Julian reflected on the question. A rare experience for someone who states opinions as swiftly as they develop. It's different, he finally acknowledged. Not better or worse, just different. I notice things I miss when I focus on the next activity or challenge. Hope nodded encouragingly. Like what? Like how many different bird sounds there are. Or how people's walking styles say something about their personalities. Or how sunlight creates patterns through leaves. Julian gestured toward the playing children. I watched them without needing to join in or improve their game. Just appreciated their joy from a distance. That's exactly it, Hope exclaimed, then immediately moderated her enthusiasm to match the more subdued tone of their conversation. That's what I meant about finding balance. Not stopping our adventures, just complementing them with moments of observation and silence. Julian studied her. Behind her vibrant exterior and seemingly inexhaustible energy, Hope possessed a thoughtfulness he had not fully recognized. You do this often? Exist? He inquired. Hope nodded, sipping her bubble tea. My dance style requires both explosive energy and absolute stillness. I've learned that quiet moments inform the dynamic ones. They're equally important parts of the same expression. Julian believed this philosophy was very different from his constant motion approach to life. I've always thought rest was just preparation for more action, he admitted. It was a necessary recovery period, rather than something valuable. That's the idle training talking, Hope observed insightfully. Everything is measured by productivity and performance metrics. Probably, Julian agreed, surprisingly realizing how much his professional conditioning had influenced his life. They sat in silence for several minutes, another unprecedented experience that Julian found comfortable. So, Hope said finally, playful energy returning to her expression, ready to resume our regularly scheduled chaos, or shall we continue this stillness experiment? Could we maybe do both? Alternate between your approach and mine. Find some balanced chaos? Hope's smile was tender. Balanced chaos, she repeated thoughtfully. I like that. It suits us. Roman meticulously planned every detail of today's museum visit. After thorough research and careful consideration of lighting, crowd flow, and exhibit layout, he had mapped out the best route through the Museum of Contemporary Art's new installation. What he hadn't anticipated was the total lack of verbal communication for the past 47 minutes of his visit with Ellie. It had started innocently enough. They exchanged the usual greetings when meeting outside the museum, before entering the first exhibition room. Roman had prepared several observations on the complex arrangement of mirrors and light in the initial installation, which created the illusion of infinite space. Still, before he could share them, Ellie placed a finger against her lips, then pointed to a small sign he had overlooked. Silent reflection encouraged. Taking this institutional suggestion as a binding protocol, as was his nature, Roman nodded his understanding and refrained from speaking. Ellie smiled appreciatively, and they proceeded through the exhibition in silence. That had been 47 minutes ago. They had now progressed through 6 exhibition rooms without exchanging a single word, communicating solely through subtle glances, slight gestures, and the occasional exchange of notes jotted in their respective exhibition guides. The experience was foreign to Roman, whose approach to art had always been deeply analytical and verbally processed. Yet, to his surprise, he didn't mind it. It felt freeing to see the artwork without immediately categorizing, analyzing, or interpreting it through words. Instead of talking about art, he was enjoying it and watching Ellie's reactions, rather than discussing it aloud. He noticed details he might have otherwise missed: the slight widening of her eyes when particularly moved by a piece, the almost imperceptible head tilt that indicated curiosity or confusion, and the subtle change in her breathing in response to different installations. These physical manifestations of aesthetic experience fascinated him. In the 7th exhibition room, which featured immersive light and sound that created the feeling of moving through abstract emotional states, Roman stood beside Ellie as waves of blue light washed over them, synchronized with ambient tones that seemed to vibrate physically through space. Roman reached out, his hand finding hers in the blue-tinted darkness. It was an instinctive gesture. Ellie glanced at him, surprised, but did not pull away. Instead, her fingers interlaced with his, as they continued experiencing the installation together, still wordless. They completed the entire exhibition this way, moving from installation to installation, occasionally jotting down brief notes for each other, but mainly communicating through shared experience and physical closeness. Roman thought that it was the most unusual museum visit. When they finally exited into the clear afternoon light, Roman was hesitant to break the silence that had defined their experience. Words suddenly seemed inadequate to capture the shared understanding they had developed. Ellie solved the dilemma by speaking first, her voice soft, as if respecting the boundary between their silent experience and the return to conventional interaction. "That was," she began, struggling to find adequate language. "Different," Roman supplied when she trailed off. Ellie nodded. "I've always found that the most profound moments with art happen when I suspend verbal analysis during the initial encounter," she explained. "Words come later, after direct sensory and emotional engagement." "I've never approached art that way," Roman admitted. "My education emphasized immediate critical analysis and contextual positioning." "Did you dislike the silent approach?" Ellie asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Quite the opposite," Roman replied thoughtfully. "I found it illuminating. Experiencing rather than analyzing created a different quality of engagement." "And the hand-holding?" Ellie inquired, a hint of playfulness entering her scholarly tone. "Was that also an experimental approach to aesthetic experience?" Roman felt heat rising in his face, the physiological response commonly called blushing that he had observed in others but rarely experienced himself. "That was unplanned," he acknowledged. "A spontaneous response." "I liked it," Ellie said. "Both the silence and the spontaneity." "I did too. Though it represents a significant deviation from my usual methodological approach to experience." Ellie smiled, the smile Roman had catalogued as amused by academic terminology in personal contexts, but found endearing rather than condescending. "Perhaps," she suggested, "we could incorporate both approaches in the future? Periods of analysis and discussion, balanced with intervals of silent, shared presence?" "A complementary methodology," Roman nodded, mentally structuring the concept into a testable framework. "Integrating analytical and experiential approaches for a more comprehensive understanding." "Exactly," Ellie agreed. "Though I might describe it less academically as sometimes just being together without talking about being together." "I believe I would enjoy that experimental approach," he said finally, consciously avoiding the complex terminology. Vic had always felt most comfortable expressing himself through symbols instead of direct statements. Though confusing to many, his metaphorical speech enabled him to convey complex emotions. Today, he was attempting something unprecedented, a deliberately clear explanation of a concrete project without resorting to abstract imagery or poetic allusion. The sanctuary will offer rehabilitation for injured wild birds and permanent housing for those unable to return to natural habitats, he explained, showing Sarah the architectural renderings he had commissioned. The design incorporates sustainable materials and solar energy systems to minimize environmental impact. They sat in a quiet corner of Han River Park, with various documents spread out across their picnic blanket, as Vic explained his vision for a wildlife rehabilitation center. He had been working on the project privately for years, but had never shared it with anyone. Sarah examined the plans. "This is remarkable, Vic," she said finally, looking up with approval in her eyes. "How long have you been planning this?" "Since Yonton," Vic admitted, referring to his deceased Pomeranian. His loss highlighted how fragile the bond between humans and animals can be. It affected me deeply. That's why your flower metaphors often refer to resilience and protected growth, she guessed. You're expressing a caretaking instinct through symbolic language. Vic nodded, touched by her perception. Few people bothered to decode the meanings behind his abstract communication, typically dismissing it as artistic affectation rather than an expression of complex emotion. My foundation's animal protection initiatives might collaborate with your sanctuary project. We have been seeking rehabilitation facilities that include an educational component, which aligns with your design. You think it's viable? Not merely aspirational idealism? With proper development and partnership, the combination of rehabilitation, education, and sustainable design addresses multiple needs simultaneously. Vic felt a weight lifted that he hadn't fully realized was there, the burden of carrying a meaningful dream alone, uncertain of its practical viability. I've hesitated to share this, he admitted quietly. Creative vision is vulnerable to pragmatic criticism. Some pragmatic perspectives can strengthen creative vision rather than diminish it, Sarah pointed out suggestively. The right partnership balances idealism with practical implementation. The word partnership lingered between them, carrying implications beyond the immediate conversation about wildlife rehabilitation. Like us? Vic asked directly, a significant departure from his usual communication style. Sarah held his gaze steadily. Yes, she said. Our different methods come together to form a strength greater than what either of us could achieve alone. It was the most straightforward exchange they had ever had. No flower metaphors, cloud symbolism, or abstract references mediating the communication, just a direct acknowledgement of a connection developing through their unique form of dialogue. I brought something for you, Vic said after a moment, reaching into his bag. He carefully withdrew a wrapped package and handed it over with unusual directness. Sarah slowly unwrapped it, revealing a handcrafted album. When she opened it, she saw pressed flowers arranged in what seemed to be a thoughtful order, each labeled with a date and location. Our conversations, Vic explained. Each flower represents the essence of our exchange. A physical record of connection evolving through time. Sarah touched the pages delicately, visibly moved by the meaning behind the gift. You kept a flower from every meeting we've had? Vic nodded. Words fade from memory. Preserved blossoms maintain their essence even as their form changes. This is... Sarah began, then paused, struggling to find adequate words. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small sketchbook. Opening it, she revealed a series of delicate drawings, each depicting Vic in various settings, surrounded by subtle symbolic elements that referenced their conversations. The artistic style was unexpected from someone known primarily for her fashion sense, revealing a depth of perception and talent Vic had not known she possessed. You've been documenting too, he observed, deeply touched by this revelation. In my way, Sarah acknowledged. I started sketching again after meeting you. Your perspective made me want to capture moments rather than experience them transiently. They sat in comfortable silence, each observing the other's record of their growing connection, one through preserved flowers and the other through sketches, two different ways of capturing the same. Vic finally suggested, we should visit the potential sanctuary location together. Your practical perspective would strengthen the implementation strategy. I'd like that, Sarah agreed. Perhaps you could visit the Foundation's current rehabilitation partner to inspire enhanced facility design. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, they continued discussing the sanctuary project. Their conversation flowed effortlessly between practical considerations and more abstract perspectives, each approach strengthening rather than contradicting the other. Jake was overwhelmed with terror. As C7's youngest member, He performed for stadium crowds, endured brutal training evaluations, and faced entertainment industry executives without flinching. Yet none of those experiences compares to the paralyzing fear currently making him nearly unable to control his body. Are you going to press play, or should we wait for the heat death of the universe? Tina asked dryly, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the private dance studio Jake had booked for this specific purpose. I'm mentally preparing, Jake explained, finger hovering over his laptop's touchpad. You've been mentally preparing for 17 minutes, Tina pointed out, checking her watch exaggeratedly. The studio rental is only for 2 hours. At this rate, we'll spend the entire time watching you contemplate pressing a button. Jake took a deep breath, trying to summon the confidence that usually came easily on stage, but seemed to have disappeared entirely in this private setting. It's just, these aren't C7 choreographies, he explained haltingly. They're personal projects. Experimental. Possibly terrible. Tina's expression softened. That's why I agreed to watch them. C7's performances are technically impressive, but commercially constrained. I'm curious about what you create when those constraints are removed. This honest admission somehow made the situation both better and worse. On one hand, Tina was deeply interested in his creative expression. On the other hand, the prospect of disappointing her was even more terrifying than he had initially thought. You mentioned at Madison Square Garden that you felt seen, Tina continued, surprising Jake with this direct reference to their contested connection. These videos are your chance to show me who you are, beyond the idol persona. Isn't that what you wanted? Jake stared at her, momentarily forgetting about the video entirely. You remember? Of course I remember, Tina replied, a hint of impatience in her tone. I'm not in the habit of having intense eye contact moments with performing idols. It was notable. But you said. I said a lot of things, Tina interrupted. Professional boundaries exist for a reason, especially in teaching contexts. Now, will you show me these artistic expressions you've been cryptically alluding to for weeks, or should I leave and use this time for practice? Jake's finger finally made contact with the touchpad, starting the first video before he could overthink the decision any further. The screen displayed Jake in this same studio, but his movements differed entirely from the precise, powerful performance style that characterized C7's choreography. Here, his dancing was fluid, experimental, almost improvisational, exploring shapes and dynamics that would never appear in commercial music performances. The most striking difference, however, was the emotional quality. Without the bright, camera-ready expression mandatory for idol performances, Jake's face revealed a raw intensity, concentration, vulnerability, and a searching quality that transformed the technical movement into something deeply personal. Neither spoke as the first video played through, then transitioned automatically to the second, which featured a different movement quality entirely, sharp, almost aggressive choreography that seemed to manifest internal conflict physically. By the third video, Jake couldn't bear to watch either the screen or Tina's reaction. Instead, he fixated on a corner of the studio floor while trying to control his breathing. When the final video ended, the silence that followed seemed to stretch indefinitely. Jake finally risked a glance at Tina, trying to interpret her neutral expression. Well, he asked when the suspense became unbearable. This is what I was talking about in class, Tina revealed. When I said you danced from your head instead of your heart during training, this was missing. Jake was not sure whether to interpret this as criticism or praise. And that's good. It's honest, Tina replied. Your technical training is evident in every movement, but it emphasizes expression over perfection. That's the difference between performance and art. So you liked it? Jake pressed, seeking a more definitive evaluation. Tina fixed him with a look, that was both exasperated and affectionate. Yes, Jake. I liked it very much. You're an artist trapped in an idol's training regimen, which is fascinating and slightly tragic. I don't feel trapped, Jake clarified. I love performing with C7. It's just different from this. Different facets of the same person, Tina suggested, understanding in her voice. The public performer and the private artist. Jake nodded, relief flooding through him at being so accurately perceived. Exactly. The question is, Tina continued thoughtfully, why show me? Of all people? The directness of the question caught Jake off guard. He had prepared elaborate explanations about artistic feedback and professional development, but found himself unwilling to hide behind those convenient pretexts in the face of Tina's straightforward inquiry. Because that moment in New York was real, he said finally, the honest answer surprising even himself. And because you see dance as art, not just entertainment. And because, he hesitated, then committed to complete honesty, your opinion matters to me more than it probably should. Tina studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then without warning, she stood up. Show me the third piece, she instructed, moving to the center of the studio. The one with the circular pathways and level changes. Teach it to me. Jake blinked in surprise. You want to teach it? I want to understand it, Tina clarified. From the inside. Dance communicates differently when embodied versus observed. Jake hesitantly stepped into the center of the room with her, hyper-aware of her presence, in a way that caused his usual body confidence to waver slightly. It begins with this contraction, he demonstrated, recalling technical instruction. Then expands through the sternum, before the momentum reaches the initial turn. Tina mirrored his movement with the attention of a professional dancer, adding her touch to the choreography in subtle ways that both honored his original intention and transformed it. As they moved through the sequence together, the barriers of student-teacher, idol-choreographer, pursuer-pursued seemed to dissolve, replaced by the simple connection of two artists sharing physical expression. The choreography became a conversation. Jake demonstrated a section, and Tina interpreted it with her unique movement quality. The dance evolved through their exchange in ways neither could have created on their own. When they finally completed the sequence, both slightly breathless, Tina looked at Jake with a new understanding. Now I see, she said. See what? Jake asked, uncertain what revelation their dancing had sparked. Why is your dancing different from other technically proficient performers? Tina explained. You're not executing movement, you're inhabiting questions. Each phrase is an exploration rather than a statement. The observation was so accurate that Jake felt momentarily vulnerable, as if Tina had somehow read his thoughts. That's yes, he acknowledged, surprised by her perception. I've never been able to explain it that way, but that's exactly it. Which is why you find contemporary improvisation so challenging at first, Tina continued, making connections that Jake himself had not fully articulated. Your explorations were pre-choreographed, in controlled form. Improvisation requires asking questions and discovering answers simultaneously. Jake stared at her, amazed by this insight into his creative process. How did you understand that so quickly? Tina shrugged, though the thoughtfulness in her eyes belied the casual gesture. Dancing with someone reveals more than watching them. It shares the truth that words often obscure. I have a performance project, Tina said finally. A contemporary piece exploring the tension between structured choreography and improvised response. Would you be interested in collaborating? Jake tried to hide the rush of happiness this invitation caused, keeping what he hoped was a professional demeanor. I'd like that. Very much. It would be outside your C7 image, Tina warned. No flashy costumes or camera-ready expressions. Just dance improvisation. Even better, Jake assured her. As they began discussing potential approaches to the collaboration, Jake realized that something fundamental had shifted in their dynamic. Tina saw him not as C7's Jake or a student in her contemporary class, but as a fellow artist with a unique perspective to contribute. As evening settled over Seoul, the 7 members of C7 gradually reconvened at their dorm, drawn back to their shared space after days of being scattered in various personal pursuits. They gathered in the living room in the arrangement that had become natural after years of cohabitation, John and Roman on the main couch, Silas cross-legged on the floor with his laptop, Julian sprawled across an oversized chair meant for one but somehow fitting his constant motion, Jake perched on the armrest of a reading chair, and Vic standing by the window watching the cityscape. James entered last, exhausted yet lively as he sank onto the remaining seat. "So," John began, the eldest assuming the role of conversation facilitator, "it seems we've all had an eventful few days." "That's one word for it," James agreed wryly. "I've had approximately 17 crisis conversations with Evan and Muse about media management and public perception, which is not how I anticipated my dance instructor relationship evolving." "How is Muse handling the attention?" Roman inquired with genuine concern. "Better than expected," James admitted. "She's treated the whole thing as an absurdist comedy rather than a crisis. Yesterday she wore a trench coat and sunglasses to her kindergarten class. She pretended to be undercover, which the children found hilarious and completely failed to understand, referencing media scrutiny. She sounds remarkably resilient, John observed with approval. Resilient, yes. Conventional, no, James clarified with a smile that suggested this unconventional approach was what he valued. What about everyone else? Julian asked, bouncing slightly despite his sprawled position. Any major revelations or life-changing developments? Roman, you look suspiciously contemplative even by your standards. Roman adjusted his glasses, a gesture the members recognized as his processing significant emotional content gesture. I visited an art exhibition with Ellie, he began carefully. We didn't speak. For the entire exhibition. 6 pairs of eyes regarded him with varying degrees of confusion. Like you argued? Jake attempted to clarify. No, we intentionally experienced the exhibition without verbal communication, Roman explained. It was illuminating. A different modality of connection. Hold on, Julian interrupted, sitting up with sudden interest. You, Roman, a master of 7-syllable analytical terminology and 20-minute lectures on brush technique evolution in Renaissance portraiture, voluntarily went without speaking for an entire museum visit? 1.5 hours, Roman confirmed. The apocalypse is truly upon us, Silas deadpanned from his position on the floor. What about you, Silas? John redirected, noticing their producer member's uncharacteristic fidgeting with his laptop. You've been suspiciously productive in your studio lately. Silas's fingers stilled on his keyboard, a barely perceptible flush rising on his face. I've been experimenting with some new compositional approaches. Nothing significant. He wrote MiRe a love song disguised as a technical exploration of contrasting production methodologies, Julian stage whispered dramatically. It's not. Silas began defensively, then stopped, reconsidering. It's more accurate to describe it as an experimental track, exploring the creative tension between opposing production philosophies. So, a love song, Jake translated with a grin. Silas's glare would have withered anyone else, but years of exposure had granted his bandmates immunity to his intimidation techniques. Did you send it to her? John asked. Yes, Silas admitted after a moment. He paused, seemingly struggling with unfamiliar emotional territory, understood it. The intention, behind the composition. She's incorporating some of her production techniques into a counter-response track. A musical conversation, Vic observed quietly by the window. Communication through creation, rather than conventional dialogue. Yes, Silas agreed, looking relieved at this framing. Exactly that. What about you, Vic? Roman inquired. You've been even more enigmatic than usual lately. Vic turned from the window, his inscrutable expression softened with contentment. Sarah and I are developing a wildlife sanctuary project. Combining her practical conservation experience with my design concepts. That's remarkably concrete, John noted with surprise. I don't think I've ever heard you describe a project without at least 3 meteorological metaphors and 1 reference to celestial bodies. A ghost of a smile touched Vic's lips. Different communication modes serve different purposes. Sarah translates my metaphorical inclinations into practical applications. I illuminate her pragmatic approach with conceptual perspectives. They balance each other, Jake interpreted, each providing what the other approach might miss. Vic nodded, returning to his contemplation of the evening cityscape, yet with a newfound presence in the conversation, despite his physical position at its periphery. Julian? John prompted, turning to their energetic member. You've been suspiciously still for almost 15 minutes. Should we be concerned? Julian grinned, though, with slightly less manic energy than his usual expression. Hope and I are exploring the revolutionary concept of occasionally not doing things at maximum intensity all the time. This announcement was met with exaggerated gasps of disbelief from several members. I know, Julian acknowledged, laughing at their reaction. There's this weird state called just existing, where you experience things without immediately turning them into activities or challenges. It's wild. Next you'll tell us you sat still for over 30 seconds, James teased. Almost 18 minutes, Julian reported proudly. On a park bench. Just existing. Observing clouds and stuff. The medical community should be notified of this unprecedented phenomenon, Silas suggested dryly. Julian threw a decorative pillow at him, with predictable results. And you, Jake? John continued, completing their informal check-in circle. Any developments with your dance project? Jake's expression brightened subtly. Tina and I are collaborating on a contemporary performance piece. She understood my experimental work. Saw what I was trying to express. That's significant, Roman detected perceptively. Being seen for your artistic intention, rather than just performance skill. Jake nodded, clearly touched by this complete articulation of his experience. It's different from what I expected, but somehow more meaningful. And what about you, John? James asked, turning the conversation back to their eldest member. Any progress in making the unflappable food critic crack a smile? John's expression was one of mysticism, as if he had witnessed a miracle and was still processing the experience. She laughed, he said. 6 mouths dropped open in perfect synchronization. Not at one of your carefully crafted food puns, Roman clarified, clearly skeptical. Nope, John confirmed. At possibly the worst pun I've ever made. Something about putting our heads together. The universe has a twisted sense of humor, Silas observed, the others nodding solemnly. As their conversation continued, weaving between teasing banter and more meaningful revelations, a sense of companionship began to settle over the group. Beyond their professional connection as C7 members, and even their friendship developed through years of shared experience, something new was emerging. A deeper understanding of each other as individuals with unique emotional landscapes that extended beyond their public personas.